Hello and welcome to this Year 11 webinar for Christmas Carol. And there are three key learning aims, three takeaways. First of all, we're going to think about genre, audience and purpose in our analysis. Secondly, we're going to think about commenting on the effects of language and also how to embed and explain language. This is for a specific assignment. How does the writer use language to present Scrooge and his nephew in stave one? So as you are well aware, there is a roller coaster structure for much of fiction writing, and Christmas Carol comes very much under this kind of idea. We have the exposition, the rising action, the climax or the turning point, and then the resolution. And this part in stave one is near the beginning and therefore in the exposition of the novel. Now, this novel has many categorization. Some people think it is a Gothic text. People think it's a Bildungsroman, which looks at a child and how a child grows up into maturity. But many people would agree that it is in fact an allegory. So the genre for Christmas Carol is an allegory, one of the many genres. What is an allegory? Well, an allegory is a form of text that has a central antagonist. So often the figure is a hate figure, someone that we love to hate, someone who has obviously done something wrong, someone with a bad reputation, who's made bad decisions, and they keep making wrong decisions. One big wrong decision, several wrong decisions, but there is an opportunity for change or punishment. And in an allegory, there are always moral messages. So we learn through this unpleasant, unpopular, or somehow ill-fated character who keeps making wrong decisions. We learn how to change or how to be punished. We learn what's wrong and what's right. And Dickens uses this allegory for several reasons. He looks at privilege and affluence. He considers the idea that society is full of people who are wealthy, who have power, who have money, and he looks at what the wealthy do with their money. He looks at poverty and need, and there are several characters that we can see through the allegory, through Christmas Carol, who are in need, who are poorer, and they're contrasted. And it's really looking at what society is willing or able to do with the poor. And the other reason why Dickens uses an allegory, a story with a moral message often based around an antagonist that is unpleasant or unpopular, making the wrong decisions. The other reason that he uses this allegory is to really look at the impact of society, of moral choices. So how do our individual actions affect wider society? What is the social impact of our personal morality? And so he's using this character, Scrooge, to really explore ideas of privilege, of suffering and poverty, and of moral responsibility and the wider repercussions in society. Let's have a look at these two extracts. Let's look at the first one, which is around Scrooge for stave one. So we'll read through the extract and really look at what we can draw out from it in terms of genre and purpose, and in terms of the language. Oh, he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and he spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. That's the first extract, nice and short. So really it's looking at Scrooge through this intrusive narrator. The narrator is not a character within the action. But he does have an opinion, and he's got a very strong opinion of Scrooge. There are no two ways about it. Scrooge is not well liked by the narrator, and he wants to ensure that we, as the reader, understand that he's not a character to be warm, to feel warm towards, or to feel any ounce of sympathy or indeed empathy with. The fact that you've got exclamatory sentences, the exclamation marks there, Scrooge, old sinner, it's showing this sense of outrage, disgust for this man. Look at the lists, these participle verbs, ing verbs, wrenching, squeezing. It's this idea of someone who wants more and more and more and is never satisfied, this insatiable greed. The fact they've used this religious word, covetous, is really someone who's just so jealous of what other people have that they'll do everything they can to get what others have. Now, within this short extract, this is very Dickens. It really is condensed, richly descriptive language. There are two similes, and they're really interesting. He talks about Scrooge being hard as flint, and if you've used flint, you know that it's used for fire, to spark a light. But the flint, the steel, has never struck a generous light. So although he's hard, sharp stone with which you can cut yourself, he's an unpleasant character with a sharp tongue and a cruel, vicious words. He's not someone who you can warm to. There's no generous fire. There's nothing like a spark of love or passion there. He said he's secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. So again, something that has to be prized open and wrenched. He's closed-handed, he's hard-hearted, he's unfeeling, and also antisocial, doesn't want to be known. The cold within him froze his old features. So that's almost like pathetic fallacy. He creates a climate within him. He is cold. It's not just outside of him. He's not subject to the weather around him. He's subject to his own cold and evil heart. And that's what makes him ugly and deformed. His own evil isn't just impacting society and others around him. It's impacting his own health and well-being. It's freezing his features, so he's stuck, intransigent, he's fixed. It's nipping at his nose, so it's that sense of discomfort. It's shriveling his cheeks. There's no joy, there's no youth left because of his greed, because of his covetousness, wanting what other people have, the fact that it's insatiable and he can't ever get enough. His eyes are red. Look at the color symbolism, that sense of kind of danger. When you see red, it's that sense of danger and anger that's flickering there. His lips, thin lips, are blue. And blue, that's often that sense of deadliness. There's nothing with him that's warm or human or tactile. And he speaks shrewdly. So he's always planning and manipulative and trying to swing things around for himself with this voice that's constantly irritating. So this intrusive narrator really gives us a very strong sense of who Scrooge is. Well, what would we do with that in an analysis? Well, your teachers may well talk about PEE, PEAEL, PEA, all sorts of things, and that you have been taught about how to analyze, but really to try and secure that grade 5, you're thinking about what, how, why. It's another way of understanding it. What is the writer showing? What's the writer showing explicitly? So what's really obvious? What's implicit? What's he trying to infer through the symbolism of the red and the blue? What's he trying to show? How is he showing it? What techniques are being used? Participles, lists, similes, symbolism. How is the writer using this? Which quotations? And why? What's it building a sense of? What do we understand? And how can we link that to the genre, the fact that this is an allegory? It's about moral messages, about punishment and making the right decisions and having an impact that's positive on society with your influence and wealth rather than negative. So let's think about the passage that we've just looked at. How could we use what, how, why? Well, what is being shown? Well, we're being shown that this is an unkind, mean-spirited, selfish, greedy, unsociable, unsympathetic man who's obsessed with work, obsessed with money and gaining wealth. He's short-tempered, cynical, and he's unpopular and disliked. How? We've got all of these adjectives and participles. We've got similes. We've got pathetic fallacy and metaphors linked with the weather. We've got verbs and adverbs and the colour symbolism. And why? Why are we doing this? Why is the writer doing this? Well, he's warning us about greed. He's creating antipathy and hatred. He's contrasting Scrooge with his nephew, who is the symbol of generosity. And we'll look at the nephew in just a moment. He's causing us irritation and disgust. And what's most important is that we start to mistrust his views. So when he starts to be negative and insulting about the poor and the needy, we know that we cannot agree with him because of the antipathy and the irritation and disgust we feel. But also in the novel as a whole, because we can see that it's about transformation and change, it allows us to understand that transformation in this person is miraculous. It would take a miracle, and it does take a miracle, a supernatural sign, the 4 different ghosts, Marley and the other 3 ghosts, to transform him. His transformation is genuine, but it's also miraculous. So it's showing us really there is hope. Even the most hard-hearted, unpopular, cynical, and greedy man can change for the better. What does this look like then when we're analysing? We have to remember that the main focus is about the why. We're explaining the effects of language. So what would this look like? We'd have to make sure that we use words like suggests, implies, infers, depicts to really explain it rather than just describe what Scrooge is like, to really analyse the language. So here is a brief example of something that you could try. You could try this. So I've written, in stanza 1, Dickens presents Scrooge as a mean and miserly man who cares a great deal about money and very little about people. So in stave 1, Dickens uses this list of adjectives to describe a squeezing, wrenching old sinner. The use of onomatopoeic adjectives like scraping and grasping imply that he's not only withholds kindness from others, but he's trying to exploit the goodness in others. Dickens wants to highlight to his readers he's an unlikable man and a symbol of Victorian greed. And this negative first impression emphasizes the radical change which takes place later in the novella, where Scrooge is transformed from a cruel miser to a generous father. Okay, can you see how I've used the what, the how, and the why? I've linked it with the wider issues of Victorian greed and the wider text, because later we can see the miraculous transformation. And you can see that the quotations have been sprinkled in, they've been embedded rather than separated, embedded into the sentences. Okay, now you can pause this webinar now and have a go at writing your own version of this analysis. Okay, let us look at his opposite, a foil or a contrasting character that Dickens uses. Let's look at Fred in stave 1. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He, Fred, had heated himself with rapid walking in the frost and the fog, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean it, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas! What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." "What else can I be," returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas to you but a time of paying bills without money, a time of finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer, a time for balancing your books and having every item of them through a round of months presented dead against you? If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly. "Every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly in his heart. He should." "Uncle!" pleaded the nephew. "Nephew!" returned the uncle sternly. "Keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it!" repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you don't keep it." Let me leave it alone then," said Scrooge. "Much good may it do, much good has it ever done you." Okay, so that's the extract. So we're looking at Fred, really. We're thinking about what, how, and why. What is Fred like? Well, Fred is the opposite. He is generous. He is kind. He is popular. He is upbeat. He is welcoming. What are we using to describe Fred? There's a lot of imagery around light and heat, and there's lots of verbs, and there is this kind of idea of pathetic fallacy that Fred, the opposite of Scrooge, is glowing, almost radiating sunlight despite the fog and the frost. And why is Fred being described as the opposite of Scrooge? Well, it's encouraging us to be generous. It's creating sympathy and building this sense of enlightenment, and really building a sense of trust, so that when Fred says Christmas is a good time, when Fred says Christmas is a generous time, when Fred says I want you to come over, I look for nothing, not a single penny, then we can see that we can trust his views about Christmas and generosity and looking after each other and making society a better place. And again, it allows us to see where Scrooge is leading up to. He becomes more like Fred throughout the novel. Okay, let's have a look then for the last time at a worked example. So this is an example response. I'm trying to do those things, those 3 or 4 things that we've talked about. I'm trying to do what, how, and why. What is Fred like? How is the writer using this, presenting this, and why? Trying to use embedded quotations sprinkled throughout, and trying to link it with the wider ideas of this allegory, this tale that really teaches us moral lessons, that shows us about the impact of individual moral choices on society. So this is a response about Fred. In stave 1, Dickens presents Fred as an energetic and lively man who cares about his uncle. In the extract, Fred is described as having a cheerful voice, and this adjective suggests that he's friendly, he's present, in sharp contrast to Scrooge. And we're surprised that these men are actually related. Remember, Scrooge's voice is grating, whereas Fred's is cheerful. Fred is also described as being ruddy and handsome, and this adjective ruddy implies that his cheeks are red, not just from exercise, but also his enthusiastic approach to life. He will not be dampened by the weather or Scrooge's hard-hearted attitude. Remember, this is contrasting because Scrooge was described as being ugly and shriveled. Dickens also writes that Fred's eyes sparkled, and this continued use of light and heat imagery is heated and glowed, suggests that Fred is both the source of comfort and well-being, someone who's not afraid to expose the harsh truth to Scrooge. These verbs also emphasize the brightness that Fred brings into Scrooge's dismal office. The adverb gaily reinforces Fred's carefree spirit, and it contrasts with his uncle's stinginess. Fred can't accept that Scrooge can be miserable and rich at the same time. And this is almost foreshadowing the light that the ghosts bring to show Scrooge the error of his ways. The repeated use of rhetorical questions, what right have you, what reason have you, is emphasizing Fred's direct, almost confrontational approach. He's almost mocking and echoing Scrooge's questions. He's acting as Scrooge's conscience, reminding him that he has so much than people who are less fortunate than him, and they are happier. Dickens wants to highlight to Victorian readers the contrast between a man obsessed with financial gain and another man committed to the welfare of others. Fred represents generosity and kindness, traits that Dickens found lacking in 19th century England, where he felt that the poor laws punished the most vulnerable in society. We also see that Fred is presented as a noble and sympathetic character later on in the middle of stave 3, when Fred tells his Christmas dinner guests that he talks to Scrooge about Christmas in order to encourage his uncle to give £50 to the poor clerk. And this shows that Fred seeks to challenge Scrooge's injustice, but he does this through kindness. Okay, I hope that this has helped you to really think about the two characters, to really think about the genre, the allegory that Dickens is using, to think about how, the what, how, why, what's being presented, how it's being shown, and why, and to really contrast these characters, thinking about the author's intention. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.